Hayden, thanks. The National Alliance to End Homelessness says that on any given night, there are 5,833 people in Missouri living on the streets.
Man, everybody sees homeless people in tents out here. They think, oh, bad, horrifying. It's not horrifying. You don't realize how many people and what they've been through in their times out here.
Local housing providers have offered 70 units to meet the needs of the houseless right now. The task force just unveiled a system to track where beds are available electronically. That didn't exist before.
Missouri proudly calls itself the Show Me State, a nickname that suggests a healthy dose of skepticism and a demand for proof before belief. But ironically, one harsh reality continues to be overlooked: the rising number of people experiencing homelessness. And it's not just in the busy streets of St. Louis or Kansas City. It's also affecting mid-sized cities like Columbia, Jefferson City, Joplin, and even the suburbs of St. Charles County. According to the most recent data, on a single night in 2023, more than 6,700 people were documented as living without permanent shelter in Missouri. But these numbers aren't just statistics. They represent families sleeping in cars, veterans without access to proper care, and teenagers fleeing abusive homes, all caught in a growing crisis. The wave of homelessness in Missouri continues to rise. Recent data shows that since 2018, the number of unhoused individuals in the state has increased by 22.8%. And even more alarmingly, unsheltered homelessness has surged by nearly 77.7%. That means more people are sleeping on the streets, under bridges, or in makeshift tents, rather than in official shelters. Some of the most vulnerable subpopulations are becoming increasingly visible. Veterans, once on the front lines, now find themselves sleeping on the sidewalks of St. Louis and Kansas City. School-aged children, especially in places like Jefferson City and Columbia, are trying to continue their education while bouncing between temporary living situations. Add to that the growing number of people caught in the grip of the opioid and methamphetamine crisis, trapped in cycles that are incredibly hard to break. Zoom in on the state's hardest hit areas, and the picture becomes even more stark. In downtown St. Louis, rows of tents now line city corners and stretch along the Mississippi River. In Kansas City, the scene is no different. People sheltering under overpasses, near train tracks, and in informal encampments on the outskirts of the city. In some spots, unhoused communities have taken root for months before eventually being displaced by authorities. Meanwhile, cities like Springfield and Joplin are struggling with overcrowded shelters. In both cities, the unsheltered population has more than doubled in recent years. Even St. Charles County, often seen as a comfortable suburban enclave, is facing a growing crisis. The number of homeless children in that area has doubled in just the past 2 years. The explosion in homelessness stems from a combination of overlapping pressures coming from every direction. First, the housing crisis. Imagine this: for every 100 extremely low-income families in Missouri, there are only 45 rental units that are actually affordable. That adds up to a shortage of over 102,000 units across the state. The result? Thousands of people are left competing for far too few homes. Then there's the issue of wages. Yes, Missouri has a minimum wage, but let's do the math. To afford a modest one-bedroom apartment, a worker would need to clock 56 to 68 hours a week. And that only covers rent, not electricity, food, or transportation. So if someone gets sick, loses hours, or gets laid off, housing is often the first thing to go. Another factor fueling the crisis is addiction. Missouri has long been one of the epicenters of opioid misuse in the U.S., and in recent years, fentanyl and meth have become the biggest culprits. Many people have lost their jobs, families, and housing due to untreated addiction. Then came the COVID-19 pandemic, a massive wave of job loss, missed rent payments, and evictions suddenly pushed countless families into homelessness. Shelters were overwhelmed, and government aid often arrived too late or unevenly distributed. And let's not forget, Missouri isn't just St. Louis and Kansas City. In rural areas, homelessness often looks different. Many live in old cars, dilapidated trailers, or couch surf from one home to another. They may not be visible on the streets of big cities, but their numbers are significant, just less visible in official statistics.
Everybody sees homeless people in tents out here. They think, oh, bad, horrifying. It's not horrifying. You don't realize how many people and what they've been through in their times.
In confronting Missouri's homelessness crisis, nonprofits and community organizations have become the first line of defense. In St. Louis, for example, the St. Patrick Center serves more than 3,700 people annually, focusing on a housing-first model, job training, and mental health services. In Kansas City, Restart Inc. provides emergency shelters and transitional housing programs, helping over 7,000 individuals and families each year. Meanwhile, in Springfield and the Ozarks region, the Community Partnership of the Ozarks actively tackles family homelessness, especially among school-aged children who are increasingly displaced. These efforts are supported by new approaches from law enforcement. Some Missouri cities now rely on crisis intervention teams, CIT, police units specially trained to handle mental health crises. Instead of relying on sweeps or arrests, these teams take a more human-centered approach, listening, de-escalating, and connecting homeless individuals to social services. In St. Louis County, the program now includes over 70 law enforcement agencies, and the results have been encouraging. A decrease in violent incidents during interventions and greater access to health care for people with mental illness. Still, major challenges remain. Emergency shelters in St. Louis and Kansas City frequently report being overcapacity, with long lines forming each winter night. According to the 2023 U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development (HUD) report, Missouri has around 4,900 shelter beds, far too few to meet the needs of the 6,700 plus people experiencing homelessness on any given night. Funding remains a chronic issue. Many programs rely heavily on federal grants through HUD's continuum of care. When that funding slows or falls short, shelter operations and housing programs are at risk. In smaller towns, local support is even more limited, as municipal budgets tend to prioritize infrastructure over social services. And then there's community resistance. The NIMBY, not in my backyard mindset runs deep. Whenever a new shelter or transitional housing project is proposed, public pushback often follows, citing concerns about safety, property values, or the neighborhood's reputation. In rural areas, stigma can be even stronger. Homeless individuals are often labeled as lazy or addicts, when in reality, many are just victims of layoffs, low wages, or the housing crisis. The homelessness crisis in Missouri isn't just about tents under bridges or overcrowded shelters. It's also a legal and political battleground. In 2022, the state passed the Missouri Homeless Law, which banned sleeping on public land, including city parks and sidewalks. The law even threatened city governments if they dared to use state funds to build permanent housing for the homeless. They risked losing their state budget allocations. But things shifted in December 2023 when the Missouri Supreme Court struck down the law. The ruling was celebrated as a major victory by advocacy groups and nonprofit organizations that had long opposed what they called the criminalization of homelessness. However, the decision also created a policy vacuum. With no clear statewide direction, major cities like St. Louis and Kansas City are now left to navigate their own paths, torn between law enforcement-based approaches and housing-first strategies. Meanwhile, Missouri is facing a serious funding threat for 2025. Several reports warn of potential federal budget cuts for emergency shelter programs and rapid rehousing initiatives. Tensions are also rising at the local level. In Columbia, for instance, a social conflict erupted when a group of unhoused individuals set up camp on privately owned vacant land. Nearby residents pushed back hard, citing concerns about safety and sanitation. But activists defended the encampment, arguing that it was the only home left for people who had been turned away from overcrowded shelters. During Donald Trump's presidency, national housing policy took a sharp turn, one that significantly impacted states like Missouri. Multiple times, the White House proposed major budget cuts to HUD, Department of Housing and Urban Development, and Section 8, two crucial federal programs that support housing vouchers and the continuum of care system. These cuts posed a real threat to Missouri, where thousands of families rely on HUD assistance to avoid homelessness. Trump's frequent use of law and order rhetoric also sent a strong message to local governments. As a result, cities like St. Louis and Kansas City began leaning more toward cracking down on encampments than expanding permanent housing. Homeless camps were routinely dismantled, while long-term solutions remained limited. On the opioid crisis, Trump did elevate the issue to the national stage, and Missouri, already a major hotspot, received some attention. While rehabilitation programs expanded modestly, they lacked long-term support, and addiction-fueled homelessness continued to rise. When Joe Biden took office, there was a shift in tone and funding. Housing voucher programs received a boost, and eviction moratoriums during the COVID-19 pandemic helped thousands of Missourians stay housed. However, as the pandemic subsided, so did the emergency support. Many shelters once again became overwhelmed, and the safety net began to fray. Heading into 2025, Missouri faces a looming threat: federal budget cuts to shelters and rapid rehousing programs. If the cuts go through, emergency bed capacity could drop significantly. Some organizations in St. Louis and Springfield are already preparing for survival mode, focusing on daily emergencies rather than long-term housing strategies.
Oftentimes everybody looks to the city, like why isn't the city doing more, why isn't the city doing more? And really it's the community that could step up. So I think if we can engage with them, the people that we're trying to serve, that's a big deal. Like it's a big, big deal. We miss that, you know, like the people we serve miss that.
As Trump re-enters the political arena, old narratives have resurfaced. the push for cleaning up the streets is growing louder again. Talk of reducing federal funding for housing programs has reemerged. For Missouri, where homelessness continues to climb, shelters are over capacity and stigma remains strong in rural areas, the state finds itself in a vulnerable position. The looming question is, will Missouri revert to the old model? Tougher enforcement on the streets, but minimal investment in permanent housing. While Missouri isn't a frontline state like Texas when it comes to immigration, cities like Kansas City and St. Louis are still home to a significant immigrant population, many of whom live in constant fear. For undocumented individuals, avoiding official shelters isn't a choice driven by preference, but by fear that their personal data could end up in the hands of ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. This leads to the rise of hidden homelessness. Many immigrants live in overcrowded apartments or hop from one temporary space to another, never officially counted in homelessness statistics. As a result, the face of homelessness in Missouri is far more complex than just tents in public parks or long shelter lines. It includes entire families living in the shadows, invisible to the system, yet deeply affected by it. Missouri's homelessness crisis did not appear overnight, nor is it an unchangeable fate. Its roots are deep, tied to structural poverty, a severe lack of affordable housing, and public policies that often contradict each other. Together, these factors form a vicious cycle that keeps thousands of people trapped on the streets or in unstable living situations. But solutions do exist. Missouri has the opportunity to reverse this trend by investing in affordable housing, expanding mental health and addiction recovery services, and strengthening collaboration between city governments, nonprofits, and federal agencies. These are not just logistical fixes, they are the foundation for building a more humane and resilient system. Ultimately, it will come down to political will. Will Missouri continue down a path that criminalizes homelessness, or will it take the bold step toward long-term, compassionate solutions? That question remains unanswered. What is certain, though, is this. Homelessness is not just about finding a place to sleep. It's about restoring dignity, offering second chances, and ensuring a future for the thousands of Missourians who currently live with no place to call home.